Well, guys, welcome back, Matt. Today we are talking about something that I think that the average listener might think is super glamorous, and that is going to trial and what that looks like.
Yeah. I know growing up, one of the reasons I wanted to become a lawyer is because I would see trials on TV, and I had this, very, sexy or glamorous idea of what it would be like to be on my feet in a courtroom.
Yeah. And it's fantastic. We're both competitors. We're competitive people. And a courtroom setting it's a competition. There are rules of engagement, and it can be very intimidating for our clients. But quite frankly, Matt, a divorce trial is something that if you can, you want to avoid.
Right. Of course. Like I said, while I was enjoyed or maybe fantasized about those big, days in court, it is somebody's life.
Absolutely.
And if you find yourself in a courtroom for a divorce trial, something has gone horribly wrong along the way.
Yeah, I agree completely. And again, there are parts of trying cases that I enjoy, but I've been doing this now for 25 years, and I've gotten to scratch that itch. And the honest truth is that if you can avoid a trial, that really is the best situation for you. But sometimes you can't avoid a trial.
Right. Sometimes it is unavoidable, whether that be because both sides are just too far apart, or maybe you are unfortunately on the opposite side of somebody who has just lost all reason, or maybe even never had it. Unfortunately, sometimes it could have a big effect who your spouse hires.
That's a big deal because we did a whole episode on how to choose the right attorney if you are faced with a divorce in Mississippi, and I encourage our listeners to go back and check that out. But that's right. There are certain things we can't control, and of course, who the judge is, what the judge's calendar is like. The activities of your soon-to-be ex-spouse, and then, of course, the lawyer that they employ and the advice that they give. Those are all things that we can't control that will impact whether or not a case ends up going to trial.
Sure. Sometimes when I look at an initial consultation form and see that a potential client's spouse has hired X, I know that the odds of this thing going to a trial just quadruple.
Yeah, and also it kind of depends on where you live. So there are certain parts of the state where you've got really, really good judges who, quite frankly, make it easier for the lawyers to just try the case as opposed to doing the hard work of negotiation and creating a custom result. So sometimes that's geographically dependent too, because certain areas of the state, they're more likely to take cases to trial than other areas of the state. But wouldn't you agree with me, Matt, that generally speaking, that if the parties to the dispute, specifically a divorce in Mississippi, can work out things between themselves with their lawyers, they're going to have a better result than in the event they go to trial?
No question. I tell people all the time, when you have a trial, you are asking the person in the room that knows the least about the circumstances to make a decision.
Yeah, he's a stranger. He is going to hear, sometimes a few hours of testimony, and in bigger cases could be days or weeks of testimony to make a decision about circumstances that have developed over decades sometimes. And it's next to impossible for it doesn't matter how good of a communicator or storyteller we are as attorneys to put that information in a way that one human being can understand it all and make a fair decision for everybody. I like to say that, when lawyers are making decisions and helping guide people through getting settlements, getting results, it's like we're working with a scalpel, but judges are using hatchets and chainsaws to come up with the same result. They just they have less tools available to them than the practitioners will have in the event you can have healthy dialogue, moving your situation toward a resolution.
Right. And of course, none of that is an attack on the bench in any way. It has got to be an impossibly difficult job, and I can't imagine having to do it. You don't know anything about the facts. You have two sides that are trying to tell a different version of the same story usually, and on top of that, you have people that are actively trying to object and stop the other side from telling their story.
Right.
And that makes everything, incredibly convoluted or murky.
And I think if the chancellor was sitting here with us listening to this, they would agree. It's a very, very difficult job. And we've got some fantastic judges on the bench who really are public servants who want to help people move past the dispute that they have. But like any other human being, we have some really fantastic judges, and we have some that aren't as good, aren't as thorough, and quite frankly, that's one of the things that we have zero control over. So it's not something that we give a lot of thought to on the front end. But certainly, you have to factor in who the judge is and the personality of that judge when you're thinking about whether or not you want to take your case to trial.
Right.
And again, judges are elected in Mississippi, so we have trials in Mississippi before a chancellor, and that, depending on the county, there could be 1, 2, 3, sometimes 4 of these people, and they randomly get assigned your case, and the person who has been appointed to hear your case is going to have a very, very big impact on how we try to create custom settlements, and also in the unfortunate event that you end up taking your case to trial.
Right. They're going to have a big effect not only on the result, the decision, but the way that they run their courtroom is going to have a big effect on how long the entire process takes.
Sure. And that's not even to mention the expense associated with going to trial, because for every day in trial, it really takes about 2 or 3 days to properly prepare for trial. So if you've got a 3-day trial scheduled, it's going to take us, on our best day, probably 4, 5, 6 days to get ready for that trial. And so you're not thinking about the expense of 3 days of trial. And a trial day is not a 7.5 hour day. I mean, usually for us, trial days could start as early as 5 a.m. or earlier and go all the way up to 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night, because it really is, when a trial's happening, it's really all that we have capacity to do because it's so intense.
Right. I would, I've never actually done the math and averaged it, but my guess is that in an average divorce trial, a day in court, I usually bill about 15 hours.
Right.
That's getting ready before the trial, in the morning of. That's traveling there usually if it's somewhere local. All of the events that happen as you're at the courthouse, usually debriefing a client after the day's testimony has finished. And if it's a multi-day trial, you're going back to the office and getting ready for the next day.
Right.
So it's a long day. It's a long process in the lead up to it. And bottom line, avoid it if you can.
Yeah.
But in the event that it can't be avoided, make sure that you have hired somebody that is familiar with courtrooms and that has tried divorce cases before.
Right. And we've got a lot of characters around Mississippi, different lawyers in different parts of the state. And there's a lawyer from over in East Mississippi that I call the professor. And he likes to say that, trying cases is kind of like playing baseball, for attorneys. And some people can just hit and some people can't. And so, there's lawyers who have diverse skill sets, and some lawyers are better on their feet communicating in an open court setting and telling the stories and understanding the rules of engagement, which are the rules of evidence. And other lawyers are better behind the scenes and doing paperwork. And so go back and listen to our episode where we talked about picking the right attorney. And if your case is going to trial, you want to make sure that you have a person who is very, very comfortable in that setting and has a mastery of the rules of evidence, because that's going to be critically important. And again, unfortunately, you may or may not have a lot of control as to whether or not your case goes to trial. But if it does, you want to make sure that you are with someone who being in a courtroom is second nature.
Yeah. And, oddly, it makes me think about that old Teddy Roosevelt quote, which is it walk softly but carry a big stick?
That's right.
Sometimes having a big stick with you actually will keep you out of a divorce trial.
Exactly.
The fact that you have hired somebody that has a reputation in a courtroom, it very well might be what helps settle the case.
Yeah, exactly. And let me tell you, because going to trial, I can tell you, Matt and we were preparing for a big trial recently before we sat down to record this episode. And it is, even for the lawyers, it is exhausting. It is emotionally, mentally, spiritually exhausting. And I've been fortunate that I've never personally, had my life on display in a courtroom in that way. But I can only imagine how much more exponentially difficult that is for our clients from an emotional standpoint. It's just exhausting.
Right.
And so the bottom line, the first part of this podcast, if you can avoid a trial, you definitely want to avoid a trial. But if you can't,
it's a last resort.
It's a last resort.